Today's topic is on terms, discounts, and promotions. So these are all sort of the nitty-gritty things that, let's say, finalize or flesh out the total value proposition. Welcome to the fourth pricing webinar out of 6, where we're talking everything B2B SaaS. I think this is a very niche topic, right? So I think with 21 people now, which is about, I think most of the other webinars before this had 100 plus people. I'm very much expecting this to be sort of the one with the smallest audience, but really happy that you guys are here. It also means you're going to have to ask questions, because the format, just like the other times, is that I'm going to speak on the topic for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have 30 minutes of Q&A. Okay, so the overall structure of this is that we're doing 6 webinars. This is number 4. So first, that was August 21st, we did SaaS packaging. Then we did SaaS pricing models. Then 2 weeks ago, we did service design. And then now we're doing terms, discounts, and promotions. Next week, we're going to do expansion revenue and talk a little bit more about renewals. We are going to touch on that today as well. And then we're going to talk about how to run a B2B SaaS pricing project as sort of the final webinar in 2 weeks. Just like the other weeks, whenever you want to go and discuss something, find the recording, find the slides. I'm also going to show a spreadsheet template model to you guys. This is where you go to get all that. That's at school with a K, so skool.com/SaaS-pricing/about. That's where we have the community. And the community is here. It's essentially a forum with, I think we're up to 425 members. And I think a lot of you guys are actually probably already members in the community. So if you go here into the classroom section, you can see that there is a webinar series, and then the webinar recordings are in there, the slides are in there, and then once I'm done here, I'll upload this recording as well and these slides as well, so that you can all access it in there. So, and we're also going to open up a discussion. So in case the Q&A isn't enough, there will be a thread in the forum inside the community where you get to ask follow-up questions and so forth. So that's the model. Okay. And I see we're now 36 people. So, and actually, that's great. I would have expected less for something this dry, but I'll try to make it, exciting. Okay. So now the presentation part for about 30 minutes or so. I am going to talk about the following. Commercial debt, I'll explain what that is. Terms and conditions, I have 2 steps there, contract framework, and then what I call a terms design framework that I'll show you as a 4-step model. And then I'll talk about how to give discounts. I couldn't find a better title for that section, but it's essentially a way to prioritize how you execute and negotiate a given contract with a customer to avoid commercial debt. And I'll speak into that at the end. And then we're going to have the 30 minutes of Q&A. So with that said, let's get started. So commercial debt. This is a topic that I haven't invented. It was the CFO of Visma, as far as I know, that used the term in a keynote presentation a couple of years ago, Visma being an ERP system, local sort of SMB targeted ERP system in Scandinavia that used this as, the essentially a catch-all term for like messy contracts and customer relationships. And I just thought that I had been using the concept, but had just lacked the word. So when he said that, I was like, that's it. That's a great term. I'll use it. I got it into like a footnote in my book before I published it a year and a half ago. And then I have been sort of trying to promote the term ever since. And essentially, so it lacks any formal definition. But the closest I can come or sort of present as is that commercial debt is the increase in operational load due to variance in customer agreements. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you have to imagine that there's some kind of baseline where if all your customer agreements had no variance, like they were all the exact same, you would have a certain load, meaning expense and velocity, in order to handle various operations. That could be service delivery, it could be contract renewals, it could be any of the sort. But in the case that your customer agreements are not all the same, that they have variants, they are different, they have different terms and conditions, they have different price points, they have different mechanisms, maybe they have all the same things, but they're just worded differently, then that creates operational load, meaning that either it costs you more money to deliver the same value at the same speed, or you spend the same money but deliver the value at a slower speed, or it costs you more money and you deliver at the same speed but you deliver less value. So any of the versions of that can come from having varying customer agreements. And I just want to give you sort of two cases that I worked with. So one was they'll remain anonymous for the purposes of this call, but it was a Nordic scale-up. They had about 8 million of ARR euros, and they had that on around 600 enterprise customers. And they were in the, let's say, employee engagement space. And they had great startup business. It had some venture backing. They had been growing pretty well. It was like a success story. And I did an internal review of their pricing and of their packaging and of their customer relationships. And together with the COO, we concluded that it was very likely that we could raise prices by about 85%, right? So that would have been, let's say, another 7 million or so, right? So we could have gone from 8 million to 15. And we did that on sort of internal benchmarking with the customers, on external benchmarking against competitors, and a various few other things. And it was normally when I do these benchmarks, actually we perform either on benchmark or better. So I think this was very realistic in this particular case. However, what had happened was that these 600 enterprise customers had all been sold on 600 different contracts by a multitude of salespeople over the years, some of which were still in the business, but some of which were not. And a lot of these contracts were literally unsigned Word documents that had been emailed back and forth, or they had been signed PDF files that were now lost on individual people's laptops, or they were put into some sort of a local drive somewhere, just in a long list with no real sort of tagging or naming of it. Sometimes you couldn't even see, like it wasn't printed on the contract who had actually signed it. It was just the signature was there, but it didn't say the actual name. So if the signature was not, you couldn't read it, it didn't say. And each of the contracts were different. So because of the salespeople had just negotiated with customers, had found different sort of forms of agreement. They had agreed on different contract and sort of product deliveries. They had agreed on different service level agreements, on different service terms in terms of professional services and onboarding and product reviews and so forth. All of this, the conclusion was that in order to actually do the necessary renegotiation with all customers, because what was true was that none of the contracts had a structure in place where we could just write them and then update the contract without triggering in renegotiation. So essentially all the contract said or has some version of the formulation that, if anything is changed in this contract, we need to agree on it in writing, right? So it's basically like, this is the deal. If anyone wants to change the deal, we need to agree on it. As opposed to your Netflix subscription that basically says, we're going to change the pricing and the product and anything else we damn like whenever we like it without your consent. And if you don't agree with it, you're free to leave, right? You can just stop paying us and then off you go, right? So that means that we're now stuck in a contract that we can either call them and cancel and then start up the renegotiation, or we can start up the renegotiation hoping that we can get them to sign a new contract. And with the kind of team that was in place with this scale up, we knew that renegotiating with all of these 600 enterprise customers would end to end probably take about 2 to 3 years, like all in, like no new sales. All the C-level team, every salesperson, like hands on deck if we had to do the renegotiation. So they didn't. They actually sold the company at the 8 million ARR. It was a nice exit. They sold to a way larger competitor who then cleaned up the commercial debt and rolled their product into their product suite and made a relatively nice uplift of the ACV on all the customers. So it's one of the cases where we see that because they grew in the way that they grew, where they wanted to grow so that they closed every sale on whatever particular dynamic or request or negotiation was present in that sale, at about this stage of around 8 million, they sort of stopped growing. And the reason that they stopped growing is that if you have 600 enterprise customers and their average renewal term is anywhere between 1, 2, and 3 years, they say the average is 2 years. That now means that you have to do about 300 renewal negotiations every year, which means that you have two options. Either you just don't do the negotiation and you just roll them over to the exact same price as you did last year. So you're just saying, we're just going to send the same invoice again, so not even an indexation. Or you actually lean in and then you do the work. And then you have one enterprise sale or the equivalent of one enterprise sale every day, like 300 days a year. And that is the operational load. So the operational load is that this is now an extra burden of work that does not need to exist, but it does exist because you have all this variance in the contracts and because the contracts are constructed in a way where whenever you need to change something, you need the consent or the approval or the agreement of the customer. I'll give you another example to in the same vein. I'm working right now with a US West Coast HR tech company that does about 100 million AR. And they did, let's say, 2 million year one, then they did 8, then they did 35, then they did 60, then they did 85. So they had a massive, quick, like explosive growth, like perfect venture case. But then from 85 to 100 took them 5 years. So they just hit some sort of like a glass ceiling. Like the S-curve was done, they were flattening out. And then and this was exactly because they had acquired a very large, very impressive portfolio of blue chip enterprise customers in the world, mainly in North America, that were, the ACV was from $250,000 to about $1 million. So it was relatively large accounts from an AR perspective. But each of these were handheld. So they were manually signed, long contracts, like US legal jargon. And they were actually, even at 100 million, barely breaking even, meaning that they had been pushed so hard by procurement in all of these organizations that they were not making any real money. So the project that we have with them now is to raise prices. That's one of the things. But the main issue actually that we're going to deal with in this organization is to clean up the commercial debt, is to actually create a new packaging and pricing structure, and then also a new contract framework structure with new terms and conditions that are uniform, meaning the same across all these 350 enterprise customers, and then just spend an entire contract renewal cycle of about 2 to 3 years to getting everybody on board the new thing as an ultimatum, and then use that as a repricing, but also using it as a very large cost reduction inside the organization so that we can be profitable. So it's just one of these examples of how something unscalable can be built even in a software company. And so the reason I think that commercial debt is a wonderful term is that it is so close to technical debt. And technical debt is almost like a known enemy. Like everybody knows what technical debt is, which is like, in principle, the code scales. Like you write the code, it's beautiful, you get a lot of customers on it. Brilliant, make a ton of money. But in reality, what happens is that, features are stacked upon each other, the infrastructure gets large, the architecture breaks down a little bit. Now you have to spend a lot of money maintaining and updating the code. Whenever you need to build something new, it's really expensive and heavy and complicated, etc., so that it slows down. That's technical debt. And commercial debt has exactly the same features, except that it's just that pure, uniform contract framework, pricing model, packaging model. But then because for whatever reason, you think short term, so you close contracts for the sake of closing the contracts, and there are slight variations and exceptions and just this one sus that you put into it, that suddenly you build this commercial debt. And I would say also these two things feed each other, right? So whenever the sales team go out and create some sort of a exception, that can be, we decided that this customer could get this bespoke feature or this particular configuration. Now that actually creates technical debt because the tech team now needs to create this exception in the code stack or the code base for this one customer. And this customer needs to have the monthly billing and not the annual. So now the billing system over in finance needs to accommodate for the monthly or whatever else is there. So whenever the sales team actually creates commercial debt, it backlogs into the technical debt. Now what happens is that the technical debt, because the features are heavy and the tech is indebted, whenever they actually want to have something new there and say, hey, we have a new feature that we want to sell. Because the code base is, let's say, there and you have the technical debt and the contract frameworks, what usually happens is that the features now get spun off as add-ons, or they just get included in the base and sales are now required to sell everything at a premium. So if the packaging isn't very good and the code base is slow and the product has a lot of SKUs or whatever it is, that actually also tends to create friction in the sales process. Like a product that isn't, let's say, that has a lot of technical debt, usually is harder to sell, which means that sales now need to make more exceptions to actually hit the quarterly targets, which then creates more commercial debt. So they have this reinforcing dynamic where technical debt creates commercial debt and commercial debt creates technical debt. And you at some point just need to do a cleanup. So whenever I'm talking contract frameworks and terms and conditions, and this is sort of almost like the fly-in, I'm almost always doing it as a prelude or context around commercial debt. Because why is it that we have terms and conditions and we have renewal cycles and we have discounts and so forth? Like, why is it an issue and what is it that we need to control for? And I think really the main issue I see with terms and conditions and the way that contracts are usually formed and the way discounts are given and the way all of these things are actually executed in businesses is that it's in the execution of the terms and conditions and the contracts that you actually build up this scenario where suddenly if you stall at 8 million or 100 million, but you will stall and the growth will discontinue and the profits will be not there, right? So whenever we have a term and condition, we always need to ask ourselves, is this going to build commercial debt? Is this conducive to having an efficient, automated, scalable business where we make money? Like, if not, what are we doing? Are we doing it just to sell this one customer? It better be a damn good customer, right? Because if it isn't, and we're just going to make this one exception to sell this customer, but now we have this continuous load, both commercially and technically in the organization, likely this customer actually isn't building value for us from an enterprise value perspective. It's actually just building sort of fluff value. It's building top line without any bottom line, or it's just building headaches for us down the road. So that's the idea here. So with that, I want to talk to you about contract frameworks and then a 4-step framework I have for building these pricing models. And I'm realizing that I probably need to sort of speed up a little bit here. So first, contract frameworks, high-level checklist. A good contract in SaaS should have a simple stipulation that the customer is a customer and you're a vendor. Like, and it sounds silly, but it just needs to be. I've actually seen a contract the other day that didn't say that. So it just, like, that just has to be there. And it must auto-renew without triggering renegotiation. So what it cannot say is that next year we will sit down and agree to be customers and vendors again. No, it has to say you're a customer and I'm a vendor until you say that you want to leave or I say that you should leave, right? So it has an auto renew because that saves you that meeting and that renewal negotiation unless something else happens. And then it must enable unilateral, meaning one directional price changes. It's an ultimatum. You say prices go up and I don't need your acceptance of it. I just need you to not churn. That's your only option. So it isn't something that you should sign, agree to, concede, whatever. As long as you remain a customer, I get to change prices. And product, that's another thing. I need to enable unilateral product changes and finally enable unilateral terms changes. So this is what you might call an aggressive contract framework in the sense that we are now as a vendor saying, we know what kind of product we have. We will allow you to leave whenever you want to leave. But as long as you are the customer, we retain the right to change anything in the customer relationship and the way we want to do business. And you can then choose to not do business with us. That is okay. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to negotiate with you, dear customer, on a one-on-one basis. What we want to do is we want to negotiate with all our customers on a group or cohort basis. So I'll not go into the details with it, but I'll give you this framework in the slides that you can download from the community page after, where I usually say that you have a subscription agreement that is signed. You can have a catalog of negotiable terms, let's say almost like a multiple choice, like are we paying monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever. But it is a predetermined set of negotiable terms that goes into the contract. And then you have a catalog of what the product is and what the prices are, but that actually sits outside the contract on the website and can be changed at any time. Then you have parts that are fixed, general terms, business services, legislation like data processing agreement, whatever, general IT, and these things that are just never negotiated. So you very strictly separate the parts of the contract that are just fixed and never negotiated, and the parts that are up for debate. And for those things that are up for debate, you have a limited, defined set of alternative formulations, like payment terms, that you could put into the contract. That is how you create some flexibility in the contract framework, but get everybody to sign the same thing. Anything ad hoc, like a specific billable project, customer playbook, whatever, all these things just need to go outside. I see a lot of contracts that just have too much in them, right? I saw a contract the other day with a client that says, we are going to support our client's mission to create a better and freer world. That's great. It has no place in a contract, right? So with that, 4-step framework for then to design these license terms. And this is where we go away from this is the agreement, this is how we should change them. And then one step into how do we actually work the economic engine of the subscription agreement. And I have 4 steps for that. An initial metric volume, which means how many users are you going to buy day one? Let's say it's users. It could also be any other metric like how many store locations are going to be served by our solution. But whatever it is, there's usually a number in most pricing models that run some sort of price per X. So how many X's do you want on day one? And then we need to determine a method or mechanism for what happens if you want more X's, like more users during the billing period. What happens if you want less users, that's downgrades. And what happens at renewal when the next billing period steps into place. And I actually have these in slides here, but I think it's actually easier to just show you the spreadsheet model that I built here that does this. See if we can, maybe that's a little bit too big here. So the way I work with it with my customers, and this isn't, I'm not arguing that this is sort of the be all end all comprehensive way to build these terms models. But this is just a tool that I've developed that I use that I find useful. So maybe you'll find it useful too, and maybe you'll also find like errors in it or inconsistencies, or you'll be able to expand on it. Like that's all good. But so I'm not claiming perfection here in any way. But I'll explain how it works, and then you can see if it's useful to you. So it's essentially like a multiple choice in 4 steps. So first we decide how we're going to choose the initial metric volume. And then one version, of course, is to just say, well, we just start from 0. The initial volume is always 0. And then, you can upgrade over time, but initial volume is always 0. And then that can work in a license-based model. That's the L. In a users-based model, that's the U. And it can work in a credit system. That's the C. So LUC. So this is what modality in the pricing model that this could actually work for. Operationally, it can be automated and should be. Initial sale is probably easy, and the expansion is going to be great. Like the net revenue retention on this model, if you start from 0, is going to be super, right? Because it's very, very low in the beginning. So there's like, if you're at the bottom, the only way to go is up, right? And the cash flow is poor, right? Because you start at 0, you're not going to get a lot of money on day one. Like that naturally comes later. That's the whole point, right? So we have these sort of 4 criteria for each of these options to say, well, how does it actually perform as a terms model once we have concluded it, right? So the operational side is how heavy is it to lift from an operational side? How the initial sale, is it easy or hard? Is the expansion going to be hard or easy or great or whatever? And is the cash flow going to be poor, medium, or great? So start from 0 is 1. Customer simply chooses, say, hey, I want 5 users, I want 25 users, whatever it is, great. Then you have a committed usage volume, which is usually good for user scenarios. Will say, hey, I will pay a price, but I will commit to having whatever 1,000 units flow through the system. But at the end, if I only have used 800, you have the right to bill me for a full 1,000, but I then get the discounted price of 1,000, that sort of model. So usually good for users based. You can also negotiate it and say, oh, I think you should really go for 25 users. And the customer then says, well, I only want 10. And then you shake on 15, whatever it is. And then finally, you can have an estimated volume based on some sort of a framework of data saying, we are going to say that because you have 10,420 employees, you need 20 admin profiles. And that's just how it is because that's what the spreadsheet says. So that's what you're going to get. So we're going to fix it or have some sort of third party data or logic determine it, and then that's just it. So what you can see is that each of these have different, so let's say, scores in terms of what the cash flow is, expansion, initial sale, and operations. Then comes the upgrade part. So let's say I sign for 10 users on day one. What happens if I need 15 at some point during the year? You can have either an instant paywall, meaning that as soon as I hit 11, I need to pay either higher prices on the new one, so the new users are more expensive than the original ones. It can be the same prices, or even if I use this model to go higher naturally, I even unlock discounts that I otherwise would have to have chosen at the beginning of the year. You can also have a delayed paywall, meaning that you can go to 10 users, but then actually you can go to 12 without us really bothering you. And then only when you hit some sort of higher ceiling more than the initial license are we going to react and force you to pay. And then finally, which is actually a favorite of mine, is just free expansion. So say, hey, you bought 10 users on day one. During the year, add as many users as you want, even 2,000. Sure, go 2,000. And then, of course, we'll price them once we get to the renewal part. But during the year, the expansion is free, right? Downgrades, usually for most things, it will be no downgrades, meaning that, whatever the volume is, that's the volume you paid us already. Usage-based models really don't have downgrades unless they have some sort of committed volume. And then renewal, you usually go either whatever you had last year, that's what you're going to have this year. So we're not going to change it unless you actively reach out, or it's a customer choice, or we do another negotiation, or we do some sort of projected usage based on the framework or the model that we maybe used at the beginning. We can also restart from zero, or we can look at the past usage or volume that you had in the previous period and then just use that either fully or at some sort of reduced. And then each of these score in this way. So if we go up here and then have a little fun with the model here, we can go a version where we say, hey, if we say that we estimate it based on a framework, and then we have, let's say, free expansion, we offer, let's say, no downgrades, and then we have previous period actual usage. We see that we're now building a model that cannot work for usage-based because we need to have all those check marks there to choose that. But we could do this for a license-based or credit model. It can be fully automated end-to-end. The initial sale looks to be pretty hard. This is going to create some, require some actual skill to get the customer to buy into. The expansion is going to be medium to really good, and the cash flow is going to be overall awesome, right? So this is just a way for me to quickly showcase what kind of structure is it that we have in place and what is it that we want to build from something like this. I'll make this available to you through the school forum so you can play around with it, and if you have further questions, shoot them inside the forum or at the end of the call. Okay, how to give discounts. So this is a little bit like a larger topic. So I have this slide. It's very dense. So luckily it's just a screenshot from this one over here. So I'll try and reduce the size here just a little bit. See if we can fit it inside one screen. I think we have it here. So the idea is that I actually think that whenever we're talking about discounts, we're not just talking about discounts. We're actually talking about 5 different things. And you might call them concessions. It's things that you, in a negotiation, give or yield to the customer. And I think they have, so I think the 5 are guarantees, planned concessions. So these are the multiple choice things that I mentioned in the contract, things that I plan to give you or have as options. It might not be the default, but I'm willing to yield it in a negotiation if you want to say monthly pricing or whatever instead of the annual. That's okay. I had already planned for it. It could be bonuses. So this is something I put as extras on top of your purchase, or it can be discounts. Those are price reductions, so reductions of your purchase, or it can be unplanned concessions. That might be, okay, we're going to scrap my contract and we're going to use your contract format all the way from scratch. And I think in my world, they are ranked in that order, meaning that guarantees generally create less commercial debt, as opposed to unplanned concessions create the most commercial debt and shouldn't be used. So I've color-coded these just to give you an idea here, where we say, hey, depending on how you use guarantees, planned concessions, bonuses, discounts, unplanned concessions, on just one-off items, let's say the onboarding project, or you use them on time-limited items, meaning that something that happens for a while but then ends, so that you at least in the long term will get into a unified contract framework with no commercial debt, or whether it is permanent, is going to have different, let's say, profiles for creating commercial debt. Generally, you can see that the most commercial debt, that's the yellow and the red, is created whenever you give actual price discounts or unplanned concessions, or whenever you do permanent bonuses like free stuff forever, like you'll get premium support forever for free, or you'll get this add-on forever for free, or you have some sort of a variance in the customer contract that is permanent, like this customer just has a different payment profile than someone else. We do both quarterly, monthly, and annual, and that of course creates some variance across the customer base, but it's not that bad. But generally, whenever I create standard operating procedures and give sales teams mandates to do discounts, we walk through, we create a catalog of these things, a catalog of guarantees, a catalog of planned concessions, a catalog of bonuses, then some discounts. We're very certain to make sure that whether they're on-off discounts, whether they are time limited, let's say first 3 months for free, first year half price, whatever it is, or whether they're permanent, such as, oh, we're just going to cut 20% of your price forever, which is way different, right? And then, of course, unplanned concessions. I talked a little bit about that in the service webinar, charge for unplanned concessions, meaning I call that a commercial SLA. I say, hey, if you want unplanned concessions, if you want something that is not in our contract and not in our contract framework, and we need to create a new framework for you and an exception on your behalf, the whole price of the solution is going to go up, let's say, 10 to 20%. And I have executed this. I have executed it in public RFPs. I have executed it in with banks as customers, with defense, with, let's say, normal privately owned businesses, and so forth. Because most customers actually, to some extent, buy this idea that whenever you have to treat them as special snowflakes and have special unscalable operating procedures set up to serve them, it actually costs money. So consider this a hierarchy, like a sequence where top and green is great, yellow is fallback, can open when necessary but not before. Red is only in the most dire of circumstances do we ever open this, and probably it should only be the CEO that gets to give these kinds of concessions, such as permanent discounts or permanent unplanned concessions. Okay, with that, I will open the floor for a Q&A. I see actually we already have some questions down here. Before I get into sort of the questions, I'll just say, please go to the chat to the right to write your question. I will answer them from the top down, so just go through that. Also, you can go to the community on school.com/SaaS pricing/about. It actually has 425 members right now. We started it, I think, 4 weeks ago right after the first webinar. So it's a super amazing forum, and I think it's like the collected brain power and experience that's in there can answer all your pricing questions. So yeah, that's just there. So if I don't have time for a question, I will have time for it in there. I will post this recording in there. I will post the slides in there. I will post the terms and condition model, the concession model, and everything else. So just do that. Okay, let's see. We have a question here. It says, unilateral price changes seem like a hard sell compared to the rest. Okay, so here's the language I use whenever I need to sell unilateral price changes. I'm saying, okay, so dear customer, we have a product today that we're going to sell you today. We also agree what the overall job to be done, a mission of the product is. Like we want to, reduce the cost of the widget industry, whatever it is, right? And you're in the widget industry, so that's why you're buying our product. However, this is a recurring solution. Like we are going to build the software and change it over time. That's part of why you're not buying a one-off license, but you're buying a subscription. That also means that we don't know what the product is going to look like in 2 years, and neither do you. Therefore, it doesn't make sense for us to agree today what the price should be tomorrow. Moreover, the way that we're going to do this is that if we have to spend our time negotiating with each and every customer, we will have less time to actually create value for the product. So we have decided instead that we have the same price for all customers, which we think is fair. And whenever we have the idea of changing prices, we first sell it in the market to your competitors, and then only if they buy are we going to introduce those prices to existing customers as well. So your guarantee that these prices are reasonable and they are at a market rate is that we guarantee that you pay the same as everyone else, including the guy that buys tomorrow, right? So this is the implicit relationship that you have to build and structure with the customer. This actually is relatively easy in a new sale, like relatively. It's harder with existing customers that they feel that they're losing something if they concede to this. But I have done this now several dozen times. And it is more, in my experience, a conversation that is feared inside the SaaS business that I work with my client business, than it actually is a hard conversation, because most customers understand the necessity for this kind of change whenever it is presented to them in a reasonable manner. So unilateral price changes can absolutely be there. What you can't have is unilateral price changes and very long contracts, right? So the ability to churn must match the ability to change prices, right? And sometimes if you have contracts, if you have software that is really sticky and really hard to churn off, I sometimes put in a planned concession that says, okay, if we change prices and you want to churn, you can hit the churn button, and then you can have the unchanged prices, like the last price that you actually agreed to, for 2 years while you find another vendor. But now you're on your way out, right? So we're actually saying, even if the scenario is that you need to have time to migrate to another solution and so forth, if at ever in the future our paths separate and you don't want to be a customer anymore, we will never stick you with a bill that you do not feel that you want to pay. So that's how you sell those. Many large enterprise clients won't agree to auto renew. What are your thoughts about that? Well, they will only not agree to it if you let them, right? So I have done so first of all, of course they are, right? They are already agreeing to auto renew in their rental contracts. They're already agreeing to auto renew in their AWS or their Azure contracts. They're already agreeing to auto renew on all their employee contracts and so forth. Like, a lot of large enterprises have auto renew agreements all over the organization already, right? So this idea that they won't agree to it just is plainly false. It is a trick that procurement is trying to play on you in order for them to have the opportunity to squeeze you year after year. You just deny it, right? Or you say, if this is it, then that's a commercial SLA and the entire, because you're going to have to pay for our renewal process every year. So you're welcome to pay 20% more for the solution. And then we can enter into this agreement every year where I just tell you what the price is and you can either churn or accept. Like, that's okay, but that's a damn expensive meeting for you to have, right? And you explained it in the context of saying, if we do this, meaning that we allow you to only have a negotiated renewal, the whole idea of us having a scalable software window goes out the window. Like, having a scalable software business goes out the window, right? So I think this is something that if you pressure test this, it actually goes through. And I have had more than a few sales teams say they're never going to accept this. And then still we had IKEA, Bank of America, US Navy, Chinese Air Force accept auto renew contracts even after we went through this process, because at the end it just makes sense, right? Of course, there are a few exceptions, but overall, if you have like a customer list of 200 enterprise customers, at least 90% of them should be on auto renew, and the rest you do commercial SLAs with. Debas asks here, thoughts on a notice period or cancel for convenience clause so they can't cancel whenever without notice? Sure. So I usually say that, first of all, like, why? So I think it's fine to say if they renew on January 1st, they need to tell you before October 1st, like something like that. Just having like a notice period, I think makes sense. It should usually match the period that you have in order to tell them about a price change. So what I usually say is that customers will look more at symmetry. Like, they will say, whatever period you have, we want to have that, and maybe even a little bit more than that. So sometimes I actually use this almost offensively and say, we can change prices on you every year, and we need to give you 3 months advance notice, but you can actually churn with, let's say, 30 days notice, and then that's fine, right? And maybe even on some of the services, you can churn during the year, whatever it is, right? So by actually creating asymmetric relationships on the time periods in the customer's favor can actually make them feel safer and get them to accept some of the other terms that you have. Right. Steven then asks, in a B2B SaaS business where most customers are on 1-year contract terms and where most customers pay annually, do you ever advocate for price increases outside of the renewal? If so, does that mean you'd be invoicing customers midterm to cover the prorated price increase for the remainder of the term? Okay, so let's say that there are at least two scenarios here. One scenario is that all of your contracts renew at the same date, let's say January 1st, and then you just have like the big cash inflow and then everybody renews at the same date. Or they renew sort of spread out over the year, like depending on when they were originally sold. I think what I do if you have that spread out period, you just announce it at, whenever you want to announce it, and then they get rolled over during the year to come. But of course, any upsells and cross sells that happen during that year. So let's say it is January 1st and you announce something on, let's say a customer renews on January 1st and you announce a price increase on February 1st. If that customer wants to buy another module or add-on on March 1st, like during that year, then you have the conversation with them and say, hey, we actually increased the prices. Maybe you should consider this. And then you cut them some sort of time-limited discount on the whole, right? And then say, okay, so we'll get you on the whole thing. Maybe this new add-on is paid at whatever the new full price, and then you just roll everything with the old price until the next January 1st, and then you do that. Because what you want is that every of the customer renews on the same date. So you don't want the core license to renew in January and the add-on to renew in March and so on, right? So as long as you keep all of them on the same renewal date, so you synchronize that, then any upsells and cross-sells during the year gets on the new price, but usually the original renewal date stays the same and only gets updated whenever they have had the due notice come through. You can have incidents where I think it actually follows the payment profile a little bit, and also it can follow you can have incidents where, for example, you have flow-through prices on some usage. Usage usually can, because it is used during the year and paid at the end, can to a larger extent be upgraded during the year, and then the price increases take effect during the year, even for people who have some sort of contract. But licenses that are paid upfront, usually it's a harder sell, and you need some sort of extraordinary circumstances to send them an extra bill during the year. So I think the modality also has a lot to say here. Where usage based, it can be frowned a little bit upon, but it can be executed, and so especially if you have a good narrative, let's say like third party costs going up or something like that, then it makes sense. Some businesses, it's even like, let's say like trading platforms, whenever trading rates or interest rates and all these things go up, they go up immediately, right? And not at the end of the year when the core license for the platform upgrades. So that would be an example of something that just changes on a usage base during the year. Licenses, less so. Will says, can you repeat what was the C in the LUC? Yeah, so the C is credit models. So if you review the webinar on pricing models, I say that there's a difference between what I call a pricing metric, so price per user, price per API call, price per something else, and then the modality. And there are three modalities. It's licenses, a right to use paid upfront, or usage, a payment for past usage paid after the fact, or a credit model, which is a little bit like Audible, where I pay for usage upfront. So I have 3 credits, and then I use the credits during the year. And then credits I don't use, they usually roll over. So they're not lost, they roll over into the next period. Yeah, I hope that's clear. Oh yeah, Steven, you answered here, credit model. Great. Like, you should get my job. That's perfect. Meredith then asks, we do a lot of bids and tenders. How do we minimize commercial and technical debt? How do we ensure we aren't being nickel and dimed with concessions in the bidding process? So when we are selected as vendor of choice, we haven't already conceded on too many things and thereby given a lot of power away. So usually, depending on what kind of product you have, the main issue with a lot of tenders is actually that the customer does the packaging, if that makes sense, right? So let's say the customer whatever, a chain of hospitals and say, oh, we need a new patient management system, and we have this idea of the software we need. So we're just going to like scope out a bunch of different sort of functionalities and streams and use cases that we would like to have someone bid on. And then what happens is that sort of, let's say, matches, let's say 60% of whatever your packaging is. And then you have the choice of saying, okay, we can either deliver only the 60% that they want, and then try to upsell them the other 40% once they realize that they actually need it. But this now creates technical debt because you need to deliver only 60%. And it also creates commercial debt because now you have a very specific contract about them only wanting features A, B, C, and not D, E, F that is part of your packaging. So that's usually how the structure is run. I like more an idea where you say, okay, I see that you need feature A, B, C, D. We have a system that does A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? So it does more, but normally the price of that would be 100. We are going to sell it to you for 70, and 70 is going to be the price for, and then you give a long time frame, 5 years, whatever, right? At which point, and that's going to be what I call a planned concession, time limited. So if we go back to that, it will be something that sits here. So it's discount, time limited, planned concession, time limited. So essentially it is a discount that times out after 5 years, and say after 5 years, the price is going to be what the price is in the market, right? So you let the customer on the product, they plan for, it can also be 3 years, like, but whatever, like a time frame that is long enough for them to sort of think, okay, then it's somebody else's problem, right? And who knows what's going to happen in the future. And then you say, at that point in time, we will look at the product you have, and then you will essentially come on our normal contract framework with a normal price list and a normal product list and so forth, right? And then you sell that into them. And that can be a way to have only short-term commercial debt that you then pay off at that point in time by getting them onto it. The other version is to give a permanent discount on the product and then just more aggressively price hike them once some sort of initial contract period is run out. The trick with these tenders and bids has to do with aligning a very unified way of delivering the value on one hand, like not messing up your packaging, and then planning for reeling them in on a pricing and terms basis later in the process. So tenders and bids should, I think, best be seen as a series of negotiations where you are now at the first negotiation, and one of your primary objectives is to prepare for and plan the second and third and fourth negotiation, like the chain of negotiations you have in the future, right? So the best option, I think, is to reduce your costs, which means don't mess up your packaging and don't mess up your pricing. So create as little debt as possible and then sell them at whatever price they want to pay, and then make sure that the renegotiation at a later stage, some years down the line, enables you to close the gap on the temporary commercial debt. The second part of the answer overall has more to do with how to negotiate these things. And I would say that so I'll off-road this a little bit and talk about negotiation overall. And I don't think that is only due to tenders and bids. It's also generally when you're dealing with procurement divisions and have relatively large ticket sizes, like large ACVs. I think what tends to happen is that you pitch your solution to a buyer, right? And then the buyer says, okay, we want it. And then they hand it off to procurement, and then procurement like kills you slowly in a long process, right? And I think one of the ways in which they kill you is that they phase the negotiation. So what I usually say is I say, well, we are happy to negotiate everything as long as we negotiate everything at once. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to log in the product first and then talk about the price and then talk about the terms in a sequence. We're happy to talk about all of the things, but they need to happen at once. Because if you want a different term, we might want a different product and so forth, right? So these things, you just insist that they're interconnected. That is one thing on the format. And then from a process point of view, you split up the negotiation into two parts. You say, because we do that, we think the most efficient way for all of us to get to an agreement is that we first talk about what interests we have. So please let us know everything that is of interest to you. Like, what do you care about? Do you care about the price? You care about being able to like the SLA, to being able to cancel, to how we can update the price. But you just interview them for whatever is important to them. And you say, and at the end you say, okay, is this everything that is important to you? And then, it's like speak now or forever hold your peace type question. And at the same time, you feedback with what is important for us is that we have a really happy customer. We have an efficient relationship where we're not spending too much time negotiating all the time with you, like sensible things that are true and that you could put into the negotiation. And then in phase 2, you then bargain. Like then you actually say, okay, so if you get this, I get that. And then you figure out something that then fits the negotiation. So overall, these negotiations are best handled by refusing to face them. And then instead say, let's do my 2 phases. One is where everything gets put on the table. Like we identify all the preferences and logics that we have and goals and objectives we have. And then after, we craft an agreement together that encompasses the whole thing. That, in my experience, creates a much better process with procurement overall. Johnny asks how to handle downgrades within a contract term. Okay, so I think I have downgrades here, right? So I skipped over downgrades relatively quickly, and it's because it's the least important because it's the least frequent, right? So usually most customers will simply accept that there are no downgrades. Like if I buy 10 users, I have 10 users. Or we say, hey, there is some sort of a negotiated downgrade. Let's say sometimes you sell software to companies that have large geographical footprints, let's say a lot of stores. And they know that they're doing a lot of M&A, so they might sell off stores. So they suddenly have, 2 months into the year, they only have half the volume, so they actually want to do a downgrade. So what I usually do is I say no downgrades, but then I put in a fallback clause where customer success can do extraordinary downgrades on a negotiated basis if, force majeure or other circumstances mandate, right? But that's how I usually do it. Sometimes you can say, well, if you have a downgrade, you can take some of the volume and you can roll it over into the next period, like fully or partially, which essentially is like, we're not going to give you your money back, but we are going to give you your money's worth by having it, let's say, deducted from next year's license payment. I don't like these. I like in some instances they can be necessary, so they are there. They're usually like people like them, customers like them, so that can be good. And of course, you have the like instant cash payback. Where you prepaid for 10, you're only going to use 5, and then you just pay them back the money for the 5 that they didn't use. Like this really puts a dent in your recurring revenue model and really reduces your enterprise value by a lot. So I would never recommend that, but of course it's an option. Okay. And then Jordan asks, and I think maybe this is going to be the last question. Let's see here. Jordan asks, would be curious to hear what frameworks you use for determining the size of the discount to offer at different volumes. Okay. So this is a little bit different. But I'll give you the fast version of this. So I determine what the price point is that I want to sell to the smallest customer I want to sell to. So let's say I'm selling whatever marketing software to agencies. And let's say that the smallest agency I want to sell to is like a 1-person freelancer. Okay, so I sell to 1-person freelancer, maybe that's whatever, $1,000 a year. And then I say, okay, what's the largest potential customer I want to sell to? Maybe that's whatever, Procter & Gamble, that they would have whatever, 10,000 licenses. Okay, so they're not going to pay me 10 million, right? So I sort of figure out, what do I think I could get Procter & Gamble at 10,000 licenses to say yes to, right? Okay, maybe 2 million, like whatever, right? You come up with a number that is appropriate for that customer. And now you have the price point for 1 user and you have for 10,000 users. And then you just essentially, configure all the price points to fit on that line more or less between those two. So it's by working out the price points at the extreme ends that you sort of get to this. But nobody knows what Procter & Gamble are going to pay for 10,000 licenses because probably your solution is unique or different in some way, or there's a reason they want to buy it. So, and maybe it has competitors, maybe not, maybe it will have, whatever it is. But that really is for your certain market conditions to figure out. But that's at least the approach that you're going to have, is to try and nail those extremes and they extrapolate from there. Okay, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Please go to the community to find the recording, and I will also copy paste the questions that I didn't have time to answer into a Q&A thread there and get them answered. So see you in the School community, and of course also see you next week when we're going to talk about expansion revenue and renewals. Okay, cheers guys, and thank you so much. All right, bye-bye.